Okay, hello everyone and welcome back to another Injustice 2 video. In this episode we're gonna be going over and I'm kind of gonna be giving an advanced overview of Blue Beetle. Now, Blue Beetle is quickly becoming one of my favorite characters to play in the game. After Captain Cold, who is my main, this character is ridiculously fun. And I think for a long time people kind of looked down on Blue Beetle. Everyone thought he was terrible. I think people are starting to figure out stuff with him and realizing that he might not be as bad as initially thought. Don't get me wrong, he's not good. Like, he's nowhere near competition viable. Like, if you get matched against a good Superman, Black Adam, Deadshot, you're gonna have a bad time. However, in terms of being an interesting character, Blue Beetle is definitely at the top. He basically plays different to any of the characters on the roster right now. Who knows what the future holds, but yeah, this is just gonna be kind of an advanced overview, more kind of going into his general game plan than going into crazy combos and all that. I will show some combos, but first things first, let's get down and talk about the character. His mobility is amazing. I mean, look at this forward dash. This forward dash is excellent. You're full screen and you're pretty much in 2 dashes. That's kind of ridiculous. And even with the back dash, you can cover a lot of space. You can put great distance between your opponent, even though his back dash is not as good as his forward dash. His back walk speed is decent, but his flight is what makes him a really interesting character in my opinion. You can do so many things off of this flight, and we'll get into that later, probably towards more the end of this video. But yeah, mobility is definitely really good. Now, Blue Beetle has 2 stances. This bladed stance, which does give him more range on his arm movements. As far as I know, you don't deal extra damage. You do also get access to this string, which is technically a unique string. This is what it looks like in his normal version. As far as I know, they deal the same amount of damage. No, this one deals more damage. The reason I don't know is because probably 90% of the times I'm in the normal stance, not the blade stance. And the biggest reason for that is in the blade stance, you lose access to his amazing projectile. This projectile, the energy cannon, is so good. The reason it's so good is because you can just litter the screen with projectiles. I mean, this is one of the few projectiles where you can have 2 out on the screen at the same time. So this is difficult to get in on, especially if you're gonna throw your rhythm off a little bit. You're like shooting it and you delay one a little bit. It can be tricky to get in, especially when you combine it with his air projectile. Now, he can do this off of his normal jump. That's completely fine. However, off his flight is where it becomes real tricky, because the flight gives him a lot of options. And this is a mid, like all air projectiles, but the meter burn one is an overhead. So if your opponent is ducking your normal projectiles, first of all, you can go like, oh shit, you can instant air this. First of all, you can meter burn this and it's a mid, and this is a mid, and of course this is an overhead, so they cannot always just duck your projectiles because you have some mix-ups off of that. And this, if you know how to fly around with him really well, you can basically cover any part of the screen with one of his air projectiles, so you definitely need to get used to the flight. Alright, in terms of other special moves, let's talk about this, the shield bash. This is his wake up. It is a pretty damn amazing move. First of all, it is safe on block, one of the few safe wake ups in the game. You can basically just really abuse this, and because it's safe, you can do any string on block into the shield. For example, as far as I know, this string is -9. That is fairly unsafe. And this is -14. You go block mode always. We talked about hit confirming before. I've made a video on it. Oh, does this not work on block? That works on block. Yeah, you can throw this string out, and if it doesn't hit, you can go into the shield bash, keep yourself safe. Other than that, the balance with the shield bash, and the thing you have to be really careful of, is its recovery. This thing has awful recovery. In fact, as far as I know, the recovery on this move is 53 frames. That is a lot. Your opponent can basically punish you from downtown if you miss with this. So you gotta be careful. You can throw this out, but if your opponent baits it with a jump, you are screwed. And of course, the bladed version is kind of more a fancy animation, deals a bit more damage, but it is unsafe. So that is another one of the reasons why I kind of always stick to the normal phase. Other than that, he has this special move, which is his combo starter. Blue Beetle is not really a combo character. One of the reasons is that he cannot really back 3 off of anything. And even when you have a move that you can back 3, for example, we have this combo. Yeah, I missed. See, the problem is, and this is one of the things I do think they need to change with Blue Beetle, you need to be able to at least combo back 3, because right now the only way to do it is to basically take a tiny step forward and immediately go into the back 3. It's a very tricky input. This character is very execution heavy, and I don't know if this was intentional because none of the other characters have this mechanic except Blue Beetle. So if there is something they're gonna change, it's definitely gotta be this. The other thing is that he doesn't really have any good mids. This is incredibly slow. This is unsafe, even though it's a launcher. The problem is you cannot really get good damage off of this. Because I don't know what the deal with it is. I think the scaling is just huge. And of course you have his restand, which we covered in the previous episode. It also goes into a string, but you cannot really do anything off of this except that. Now, the main way his damage is gonna come is from jumping in, mainly from one of his flights, and going into 1-1-1, the low mandible strike, and 1-1-1. It's decent damage. It's decent damage even without a back 3. So again, this character is not that great on the damage department unless you do one of these. Oops. If you're willing to spend 2 meters, you can get decent damage, but is that really worth it? I think not. I think this character is a lot more focused on chipping away the opponent. You know, he's tricky to approach, you can mix them up, you can fly over this all over the screen, you can be really annoying with this character. And by the time your opponent notices it, a lot of their life is gone. Mainly from hitting them with things like this, hitting them with 1-1-1s, the projectiles, air projectiles. You know, you're kind of just like slowly chipping away your opponent's HP. And that is one of the problems Blue Beetle encounters when you have a high damage character like Aquaman or Black Adam or something. You just can't keep up. You're never gonna be able to chip enough away when he can do like 50% damage with one combo. So that's one of the reasons why Blue Beetle is kind of not exactly too viable. He has some really bad matchups. Okay, so as I mentioned, the main source of your damage is going to be 1-1-1. Biggest problem with this string is that it starts with a high, like all 1-1-1s do. So if your opponent is really poke happy, they're going to be poking through everything you do. Other than that, Blue Beetle does not have a low normal. Aside from his sweep, and this is a special move of course, it's very unsafe, so you got to be careful with this. But his sweep is amazing. His sweep covers huge distances. It can be safe if you max it out from max distance. And of course it knocks down. I mean, it's a sweep. You know what a sweep is. You can't get anything off of it, but it is a decent move. What's really interesting is this string. This is the back 2-3. The reason it's interesting is that it's a double overhead, but it's also a cross up. Your opponent needs to switch their blocking direction when they get hit by a move. We already talked about this. You can mix this up. And the only problem is you don't really get too much damage off of that. But again, you're chipping away. You're chipping away. Other than that, I think it's time to get into the flight mechanics. So, He has normal flight, kind of just floats in the air. He can go, if you press up and back, this is kind of like a retreating move. It's very good because you can combine it with the dash in. Your opponent thinks you're coming in. The last second you go and retreat, maybe shoot a projectile. You can mix up your opponent that way. You can go into the dash and go into the flight again. Cross up your opponent. That's one of your options. You can go into the dash and go into kind of like a float up, which again just confuses your opponent because you're just kind of flying all over the screen. So you really want to learn the flight mechanics. You kind of have to know when you just need to use one of these and when you have to use the dash. And again, you can cross up your opponent with this. And then if you switch directions with your input, you can float away. So you can be incredibly annoying with this. The other thing is this string. This string is just fairly normal. It goes into an overhead, into kind of a stab. Nothing special. However, the 1-2 actually puts Blue Beetle into an airborne stance, and from this you can go into your flight. And this is really dangerous because you can just stay on the same side. You can go into the overhead. You can go and do this, switch sides. And if you hit it correctly, which I'm not managing to do, you can go into a cross-up. Another thing that's kind of shitty with Blue Beetle is that he has, despite being a really airborne character, he does not have the best jump-ins. He doesn't really have a cross-up, so to speak. However, this is really annoying. You can just definitely be a bitch. And of course, you can go float away, shoot a projectile. It's really confusing. It can get super confusing. So definitely use this string, sparingly though, because it starts off the 1, which is of course a high. So this is kind of how you play Blue Beetle. One thing I didn't go over is his corner game. Unfortunately, the problem is that all of his special moves EX'd, switch sides. So that's kind of shitty. The other thing is that he cannot really get damage in the corner. This is not really a corner character. However, his restand does become very good in the corner. If you manage to do, I don't know, like a back 3 for example, you can hit that in the corner and go into a restand, and from there you can have options of going for a grab, into the sweep, or into the overhead cross up. You know, you have options. However, corner game I don't think is the best with this character. You're really supposed to, again, just be really hit and run and annoy your opponent, frustrate them. His forward 3, not back 3. His forward 3 is decent. So you have an overhead there, deals decent damage. Again, you can get good damage out of this character if you're willing to spend 2 meters. That's not his optimal combo, but his optimal combos are fairly difficult to pull off. I still gotta practice them. And again, you have this, but not really worth going for when you get 253 damage for 1 meter. However, despite all that, again, try this character out because he is a lot of fun. Very interesting. I'm hoping that NRS is gonna put more kind of interesting characters in the game. More like characters with more unique mechanics and gameplay styles, because that's what's gonna keep the game interesting instead of everyone just zoning. Or although, who am I talking about? This character can zone amazingly, but you know what I mean. Just interesting characters are what keeps this game alive, because they're hype as hell to watch in tournaments. When a Blue Beetle does show up, it's really hype. This is one of the reasons I like Brainiac as well, because again, he's another character that just plays completely different. And that's why I'm really looking forward to Firestorm, because Firestorm, I think, from what I've heard, is gonna be another one of these air mobility characters. So hopefully she's gonna turn out well as well. Until then, until Firestorm comes out, I'm gonna be sticking with Blue Beetle. He's super fun. I will be using him the next time I go online, on the channel as well, to show off some matches. Try him out, he's fun to play. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.